WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore positive. Happy New Year to everyone out there. We'll be putting the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back together again, put the band back together again this year with friends, starting with G&A Coney Island Hot Dog in White Marsh, no longer in Highlandtown. So looking forward to seeing Andy out there next Thursday. All of it brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I'll have some scratch-offs to give away, as well as our friends at Goodwill. And win donation, 86690Nation. Do what I did. Get new windows. I tell you, it's 20 degrees on Christmas Eve, and it was quite pleasant inside my joint. It's been a strange week. I don't need to tell you. I think everyone who cares about the Ravens and who likes football and those who wager on it, we're all watching the Cincinnati Bengals and the Buffalo Bills on Monday night, and just an unprecedented evening. Luke Jones is going to join me now. As we chat, it is very early on Tuesday morning, full disclosure. So if you're hearing this on Wednesday or Thursday at AM 1570, you're finding it out at Baltimore Positive or on the podcast or wherever you find us these days. There's tens of thousands of you. We do appreciate every one of you. But Monday night, everything sort of went into some state of suspension the minute this incident happened. And Luke, I want to bring you in just because the minute it happened for me, I've been to more NFL games than you, right? I mean, I've been doing this a long time in press boxes there where you get injury reports, and every Chad Steele's got his little earpiece down on the field and they're giving reports back up. And when there's an incident or a carded incident, God forbid, you've been at this 15 years. I've been at this 27 years. I often wondered, what's the emergency plan after what we saw with Reggie Brown many years ago, Mike Utley many years ago, Ryan Shazier. I go through these incidents, but I thought, I don't want to know what happens, but they need to know what happens. They need to have a plan for this. And the first guy I hit was Pica, instantly, because he's in a nerve center and has worked in those jobs in New Orleans and Atlanta that something happens, what happens? And I guess we find out, Luke, it's moment to moment when this sort of situation happens. And I don't even know where to pick the pieces up less than 12 hours later as you and I talk about it, only to say that he's made it through the first night and we hope he's okay. But this was just an unprecedented and just incredible journalism from Susie Colbert and Scott Van Pelt, and just all the way through what I witnessed until I went to bed and couldn't take it anymore. But welcome in. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. And another name I want to mention, Ryan Clark, former Pittsburgh Steeler who does lots of work for ESPN. Very heartfelt comments. I think my biggest takeaway with this, Nestor, is football is very important to a lot of people. I mean, it's a major part of our livelihood, right? We want it to be important to people. Otherwise, there isn't the NFL and there isn't so many different businesses and endeavors that are attached to that. But in a moment like this, you're just reminded that something that can be so important suddenly isn't important at all anymore. And I think with Damar Hamlin, takes a hit collision with T. Higgins of the Bengals, a hit we see dozens of times every NFL Sunday, a hit that was a hard hit, but not something that makes you take pause in isolation. And then you see him get up and just collapse. And I mean, it was terrifying. And to see something like that, you just mentioned, it's a very violent game, and we see injuries in all sports, right? And we've even seen very serious injuries in all sports. Even individuals. You mentioned Mike Utley. I think of Dennis Byrd of the New York Jets, who passed away not terribly long ago. But
hey, man, I was on the air the night that Dale Earnhardt went into the wall.
Yeah.
I was on national radio that night, not knowing a hand support device. I mean, I didn't even know the terminology and the lingo of it, and that's possible every time they put those wheels on the track. Every week, right? I mean, it's just there. It's a reality. Other than Hank Gathers and other crazy, things with baseball and baseball's Canigliaro and those kinds of things that we talk about 50 years ago with just a word, just a name. And Monday night certainly stops everything that I've ever seen in regard to the sport and in regard to some sort of thought that they were going to play football again. Because if it was just a broken leg, they would just pick up the pieces and go back and play, right? Like we've seen that 1,000 times, right?
Yeah, well, and we've seen players taken away on stretchers. We've seen players suffer serious neck injuries. We've seen players who didn't have movement of their extremities, whether that movement was eventually restored or quickly restored or not. We've seen that. And I think for anyone who's played in the NFL, anyone who played football at any level, I played youth football starting at age 9. And even as a child, you know, I don't think you're thinking about, you're certainly not thinking about death or that kind of a serious notion,
Did you
but you
ever have a
also,
stinger? Did you ever go down and not feel things for a second or two?
I mean, nothing of that nature, but there was always an acknowledgement of, hey, keep your head up, and there can be a risk of a neck injury, a head injury, things of that nature. And I think, Ryan Clark talked about this on air. I've seen some other players, who played in the league talk about it. You take an acknowledgement of that, and we've talked about it with CTE and concussions and things of that nature. But so many of those situations, as horrible as they may be, there's never really a thought of fatality being a possibility, a thought of CPR being involved, as we saw with Damar Hamlin, and that's what's just so utterly terrifying about the situation. And the only thing that for me that really, you mentioned Dale Earnhardt, and clearly that's a great but also awful example as far as someone who was so high profile, beloved in NASCAR, all of that. But
We had the wrestling incident too, and I thought about that.
yeah.
Literally, when this happened and they went to break and they were going to a break and a break, my wife had fallen asleep. And I
Hmm.
literally got up and I went to the bathroom just to get away from the television because I was like, wow. And I needed a minute. I didn't want to wake her up. And the first thing I thought about was your wrestling, and it's always on our WNST Twitter timeline too, the wrestling stuff. And I thought about the incident with Owen Hart and how like everybody went home and I thought to myself in that 3 or 4 minutes of that elongated first commercial break when you're like, oh, this isn't normal, and I'm checking Twitter, and I have friends in the press box in Cincinnati
Hmm.
that I follow, and I thought of the wrestling. I mean, I thought of that being that and Dale Earnhardt. I thought of incidents where when this happens, do they stop the event? Does everybody go home? What do they do? But that was it 8:59, not an hour later, as what unfolded on the field and what unfolded with the coaches and the little cell phone and the ambulance. I mean, all of that happened that hour afterward, where everyone in the stadium, everyone in America, everyone everywhere. I don't. Owen Hart wasn't like that because it was a wrestling. Maybe in your world you remember it that night because you're watching the match. But like this was the biggest game of the year. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
something out of a horror movie for all of them, for everyone.
It was. And I mean, WWF continued the event, if you recall. They did not end the show. I mean, and to
Yeah,
much
I thought they
criticism, and
did. My legend
no, they
20
didn't.
years later is that they sent everybody home. They did not.
No, they
They
did
wrestled.
not. They did not. And I mean, that's, for all of Vince McMahon's transgressions, that's, I mean, at the top of the list, quite frankly. But, I think for me, I thought of Owen Hart eventually. And I mean, for anyone who's not familiar with that story, of course, that was 1999. He was at the top of, I was believe it was in Kansas City, I want to say it was, and he was the Blue Blazer. That was his gimmick at the time, and there was a harness he was actually propelling down from the ceiling of the arena to the ring, and the harness broke, and he
We've
he
seen
fell to his death.
mascots do this in the NFL,
Yeah, yeah.
swinging in and doing things like that. Yes.
Yeah, but I think for me, and this is going to be funny to hear this from me because I'm not a soccer guy. I came across this strictly by accident. The summer of 2021, Christian Eriksen of Denmark. It was the Euros, the 2020 Euros that had been made up the following year because of the pandemic, and he had a cardiac arrest incident where he was resuscitated. From my understanding, and I mean, it was something that I just came across channel surfing, and I saw
It
how.
showed up on my timeline
Yeah,
in the first 5 minutes. Someone said, this is not unprecedented. And I did
right.
remember the
Right.
incident, right?
Right, right. So, and that was a case where Christian Eriksen was brought back and was gone, so to speak, for a few minutes. And, thank goodness that, thank the Lord that he made a recovery. He's actually back playing, over a year later. So, you hope for the best for Damar Hamlin, but I thought of that. And I think, again, it just comes back to one thing I want to say, as much as talk about the NFL and, whether there was, who said they were going to continue to play. the truth will be set free because players will eventually react to that. What was said on the field as far as whether there truly was a 5 minute warm up. The coaches intervening. We saw what the end result was, right? The game was postponed. When will it be made up? If it will be made up, who knows? I mean, we'll find out in the
When do
coming
the
days.
Ravens play on Sunday too,
Yeah,
right? I mean, like
right,
literally.
and to
And
be
I guess all
clear,
that'll get sorted out by the time people hear this, and they'll be like, okay, but we're reacting to it in real time. And I don't know that there can be any immediate or there should be any announcement. This is unprecedented in our culture here.
yeah. And I mean, as you mentioned, and you talked to Chris Pica. I mean, what was it, 1971, when there had been a death of an NFL player in the midst of a game, something of this nature happening. But look, the games will matter again at some point, and probably some point very soon. But in the moment on Monday night, reacting to it the following morning, and over the next couple of days at the very least, and that's if the best case scenario occurs here that Damar Hamlin is doing better and recovers and is ultimately okay, as a human being. But it's incredibly, it's very sobering, and I think it's a reminder for anyone who loves the NFL, but life in general, it's very precious. And we all, whether we're talking about something as potentially extreme as playing in the NFL and understanding the health risks that these players sign up for and have always known to some point. But to that extreme where you're talking about a life or death situation, that's not something that you think about. But we also know that there are athletic trainers all across the country, and things of this nature do happen even in youth sports. And there are medical emergencies. And as much as we might say, how does the NFL at the very top, whether you're talking about Goodell or team officials, whatever, how they react to something or what their protocol is one thing. But fortunately for Damar Hamlin, there were lots of great medical people on the field ready to treat. And any head athletic trainer, and I saw various individuals reacting on social media on Monday night, they'd love, the best case scenario for them for a game is they might tape a few ankles and they're handing out water to people, but they also are prepared and are trained to treat and CPR and things of that nature. Heaven forbid that something like this happens. And, from that standpoint, it's just, again, a reminder of how precious life can be. And, we'll find out, I assume, in the coming days as far as what exactly happened. Was it a freak accident as far as when you hear about trauma to the chest and to the heart, when it is in a certain, rhythm of a heartbeat? I've seen different things that can.
Or I would go back to injuries and things like Zach Orr, right? These outlier things and heart murmurs that a player says can't play anymore. The doctors won't let me play anymore. Or what happened with Samari Rolle, right? I mean, I'm thinking of players who've had these issues, let alone the Corey Ivies. I mean, I just in my years here, I remember having John Ogden booked out at the barn in 1999, Stoney Case era, right? And it was literally, I believe it was the same night. It was in Atlanta at the Georgia Dome. I believe it was the same game that Stoney Case threw the game-winning pass to Justin Armour, if I'm not mistaken. We're going back 23, 24 years here. But John Ogden was supposed to be my guest, and he got carted off. We're talking about a Hall of Famer here, right?
Sure.
Like Ray Lewis was medevaced out of Western Maryland College. I wasn't there that day. I was broadcasting from Nate's and Leon's before an Orioles game because it was 1997, 98. The Orioles were Davey Johnson and like all of that. And you remember this from your childhood, but I mean, this is real time, no internet, radio reporting. Ray Lewis is getting medevaced out of. I mean, these incidents have happened in our own backyard with two Hall of Famers. I can promise you that happened. And this was at practice in the middle of the day, and how are they, and what happened, and this can happen anywhere. Corey Stringer, I remember I was in New York that day doing a Hard Knocks event for HBO with the Ravens doing the first ever Hard Knocks. Corey Stringer goes down. Brian Billick, obviously very close with Corey. Like, these incidents in the league, we know every report on ESPN. It's a violent game, right? We start with it's a violent game. Violence happens. Carts happen. Ambulances happen. Ryan Shazier's happen. Daryl Stingley. I was watching the Daryl Stingley game when I was a boy before you were born. I remember watching the Darryl Stingley game live when it happened. So I watched the Utley game. I remember all of these incidents, and I just thought my initial reaction was the NFL has done a bomb shelter drill on this, right? I mean, literally, right? Like they have to. The commissioner has to play out what if someone dies during the game? What if there is a shooting in the upper deck? What if there is a bomb that goes off 6 blocks away because some whatever. They have to have a plan for everything, I thought. Because I go to these owners meetings, even though I've been thrown out now. And this is why you want journalists at owners meetings, and you want questions being asked by real journalists, because the journalists are the ones picking up the pieces to report whether Damar Hamlin's alive the next morning. The first thing you do is go out to look for journalists to report truth. And, through all of this with the NFL, they're a billion-dollar industry. I watch their Super Bowls every year. I see the largesse of all the guys with the earpieces and the suits and the security and the dogs, and you deal with that, and I deal with that every year at the Super Bowl. I just thought, they just would have a red page in the back of their little book and say, stop, the commissioner's in on this immediately, and we're going to make quick decisions. Not that 1 hour wasn't a quick decision.
Yeah.
Dude, that was a long hour. That was a long hour for the National Football League, for everyone. For everyone, it was a long hour. And I hope the NFL gets a playbook on this. And obviously, we all knew this was possible. I don't want to be too journalistically, but we all knew this is possible. And I just thought that everybody would be a little more buttoned up. ESPN looked more buttoned up and ready to do their job, report on this with some sobriety and some clarity as it was going on, much more so than it felt like. It felt a little disjointed to me. It really did.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't. How soon is soon enough? How quick is quick enough? Right? I mean, and that's why
they did the right thing, right?
Right, and that's why I continue to go back to the medical personnel, the coaches on the field, and the Sean McDermott and Zach Taylor, with everything we saw and we've heard in the immediate hours, the leadership that they showed for their teams.
It looked like Zach Taylor came over and said, "We're not playing football right now."
Yeah,
right? It looked to me like this was Zach Taylor saying, "No. If we can't do this right now." That's what it felt like.
And for me, and for me, it's much more about just seeing the compassion that was shown, seeing Zach Taylor go over to the Bills locker room, seeing Joe Burrow go over to the Bills locker room, seeing that kind of, it's a brotherhood. It's a brethren among players. I mean, how many times have we heard different Ravens players, whether they're talking to them at live shows over the years, talking to them in the locker room, that it's, hey, I mean, the Ravens just played the Steelers, right? And, Ryan Clark made mention of the collision with Willis McGahee at the end of the 2008 AFC Championship game. And, you think back to big hits and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, these young men, and even the coaches, anyone involved, at the end of the day, they're sons, their fathers, their husbands, their friends, their brothers, much more so than their football players or coaches. I mean, we were just talking 24 hours ago, talking about Greg Roman and the struggles of the Ravens, and different things as far as job security and accountability, and this player not doing this or this coach not doing this. And look, we'll resume those conversations at some point, and the game doesn't feel very important right now. It'll be important again at the right point, but it's just a reminder of it is truly just a game, and it's important to a lot of people, and that's okay. But in a moment like what happened on Monday night, it's a reminder that at the end of the day, it's not all that terribly important.
It's unbelievable. 70,000 people were paying $300 to get in. There's bars packed. People gambled on the game. The Ravens were waiting on some. I mean, all of this, but none of it mattered. None of it mattered. 5 minutes, literally, when the ambulance showed up, none of that mattered anymore. And that next hour, that 9 o'clock hour Eastern time became just something I hope we never see again. I mean, I always knew it was possible, and I always wondered what happens, and now we sort of know what happens, that at least the right thing was done and everything was stopped. To your point, I got the WWE story wrong 25 years later. Like, I conflated it that they did the wrong thing with all these years later saying Well, they didn't really keep wrestling, did they? And they did.
Did.
And they could have kept playing football on Monday night because the show goes on, right? Like I'm glad they didn't, but
Right.
there was some thought like they're going to play. There was a little thought of that.
Well, it's because of what we just said. Even even situations where a player is carted off, he's put on a backboard, he's put on a neck collar, where there's fear of a spinal cord injury. There's, you wait for that thumbs up, right? We've seen players suffer horrific compound fractures of a leg, and there's some kind of, you see that they're alert, you see that they're awake, that they're conscious and breathing, and that their mortality is not in question, right? So that's where this just changes. And you just said it. I mean, we have the expression, the show must go on, right? Whether we're talking about football or any form of entertainment. I mean, I'll give you another one that I thought of. I thought of the late umpire, John McSherry, literally pitches into the first game of the 1996 season in Cincinnati, suffered a massive heart attack and died on the field. I mean, not that that was related to the sport or anything that happened in the game itself, but it's just a reminder of, we think of sports as a diversion, right? We think of sports as our escape from so many different things that are challenging in our lives, whether we're talking about personally, politically, spiritually,
Things that really matter.
Yeah, yeah. But we're reminded when something like this happens on Monday night, again, a hit that the collision itself, you see dozens of times every NFL Sunday, and we don't think much of it. And that there's nothing guaranteed in that way, and that something can go wrong. And whether it's a player having a heart condition or whether it's just a 1 in a million kind of hit and timing and matters of the heart. I mean, it can be, it's very precious, it's very fragile, and that's not for any of us to be completely terrified going about our everyday lives, but it is a reminder of life is not it's not a guarantee, right? And that's why we cherish the people in our lives that are important to us, and we enjoy getting together to watch football, right, or watch baseball or watch college basketball or whatever it might be. So again, as you and I were preparing to reconvene Tuesday morning and talk about whether the Bills won or whether the Bengals won, whether the Ravens going to be playing the Bengals at 1 or 425, whether
Or how
the
John
AFC North.
Harbaugh's upset that Gus Edwards didn't get the ball more.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
I mean, you think about all those different things, and again, we'll talk about those things again sooner rather than later, most likely. But it's very much a reminder of life is precious, and also how fortunate we are to be able to talk about such things under normal conditions, and to think about those types of things rather than talking about
Well, the
the
thing
life of
about
a
the game
24-year-old.
too was that the game, like I said to my wife at 3 in the afternoon, I'm like, I'm looking forward to this game tonight.
Big
Like
game.
this is like, yeah, like I haven't stopped everything. I even like said to her, we should put like a spread out for this one.
Yeah.
This is going to go 15 rounds. Like, and I felt that way all along. And for the game to stop in the biggest game of the year, it really, first day of the year, literally, we all should take pause here as we enter 2023 in regard to this.
No question. And that's where I take a moment, and everything I saw in terms of what was happening in Cincinnati with the crowd. And I mean, Buffalo's not that far from Cincinnati, right? I'm sure there were a number of Bills fans who made the trip, and everything I saw on social media was a fan, tens of thousands of fans really per, reacting in a way that you would hope they would, rather than the ugliness that we sometimes see with fandom and things of that nature, where you saw I saw accounts of Bengals fans comforting Bills fans leaving the stadium, and good interactions. And I think fans even gathered outside the hospital, and I believe there was a vigil at one point in the aftermath late Monday night. And I'm sure there might have been a few knuckleheads here and there, but overall it seemed like everyone understood the magnitude, the gravity of the situation. And yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it was a big game. I'm sure the secondary ticket market, I'm sure people paid hundreds to watch
It was
that
a
game.
$300 get
Yeah,
in, and I've been going to Cincinnati every year for
it's never
27
$300
years.
there, right?
I mean, I remember one Monday night during maybe the Todd Heap era where the Marvin Lewis and the Carson Palmer, like where it was sold out, like
Yeah.
literally, might have been $80 to get in. But Cincinnati's on fire, and it was just such a big game, and the league has a lot of lifting here to do schedule wise, head wise, playoff wise, money wise, television. Like there's a lot of people to answer to. Luke Jones will be answering to no one but Luke Jones here all week long. He'll be out at Baltimore. Luke, you can find him in Owings Mills. I'm sure the Ravens are going to have some reaction to this, and the Ravens headed to Cincinnati, we think, this weekend. So for us, this was our conversation in the early Wednesday morning, or excuse me, Tuesday morning in the aftermath of Monday night. We are going to be talking about all sorts of things around here this week. I've got lots and lots of guests. Tom McMillan's going to be joining us this week. My dear friend Jody Cutler talking about her deaf child and cochlear implants in a movie that's coming out called Rally Caps. That's a Baltimore-based movie with Judd Hirsch. So I have some feel-good stories here. But in the meantime, we're all going to just sort of hold on, take deep breaths, see what happens with this situation, and hope that Damar Hamlin makes a full recovery. And certainly hearts out to everybody in the community who was involved. And, Luke, before I even go to break, the first thing I thought was I saw he went to Pittsburgh, and I thought, oh my God, the kid that's quarterback of the Steelers knows it. I bet a bunch of the Steelers know the kid because he was in the building, like all of that. And I just thought how many connections there were, and his mother and the ambulance. And I just, how many games I've been to where these kinds of incidents have happened, and it all happens in real time. And I think the league did the right thing on Monday night. And certainly, again, hats off to all the journalists involved and people I know and like a whole lot, like Adam Schefter and Susie Kolber and Scott Van Pelt and Ryan Clark, just doing a great job. All right, Luke can be found at Baltimore Luke. I can be found when they let me back on Twitter. I don't know what they're going to do. You can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, wherever they allow real journalism. I'll be there. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.